Hi everyone, and welcome to this workshop series on branding. My name is Chris Converse, and today we'll be taking a look at a few different ways that we can make adjustments to photographs to match our company's mood and branding. We'll use Adobe Capture to create a look from our environment or from a photo, and we'll apply this look, which is short for a lookup table, to another image and help you style those to match your brand as well. We'll also take an introductory look at using filters and adjustment layers for those who aren't quite as familiar with Photoshop, all the way up to some advanced techniques like matching tonal ranges across different images using curve adjustments. And I'll also show you some of my own favorite techniques along the way. Now, if you'd like to follow along with me, I'll be using some images from Adobe stock, mostly the images that we used in the first workshop series when we were creating our mood board. Or of course, you can use your own photos and try these techniques out on those as well. So with that, let's get started styling photography. If you want to follow along with me, be sure to log into Creative Cloud, which will also log you into the Adobe stock service. There you can download some preview images if you want to follow along with me, or of course you can use your own photographs. We'll also be using Adobe Capture on a mobile device, and we'll be using libraries to save looks that we create from Adobe Capture. Then we'll take a look at a variety of workflows inside of Photoshop, applying looks from Capture, making color adjustments, and creating special effects. And finally, we'll also take a quick look at how to use a preset inside of Lightroom. So when you come across a downloadable preset, you'll know how to make use of it. So when you're ready, join me in the next video and we'll continue on. In this lesson, we're going to take a look at working non-destructively inside of Photoshop. So if you're already familiar with adjustment layers, smart objects, and filters, you can skip ahead and jump right into working with Adobe Capture and creating some looks. But if you haven't worked with these a lot, I'll show you how they work right now. So to begin, I'm looking at a Photoshop file here where I have a background and a layer here called Sunset. Now this is just a standard pixel-based layer, which means any changes I make on this layer will be destructive to this image, meaning I will permanently change the pixels. So the first thing that we can do to work non-destructively is to use something called an adjustment layer. So in the bottom of the layers panel, I'll come down here to this icon here, and let's come in here and add a hue saturation adjustment layer. So an adjustment layer will show up on top of all of the other layers, and you can actually move these around. So I can move this underneath, for example, and an adjustment layer will affect all of the layers below it. So if I select the icon here for the adjustment, open the properties panel, I can see all of the settings here. So if I come in here and increase the saturation, you'll see that that actually increases the saturation here on the canvas. Likewise, if I come down and decrease this, I can turn this into a black and white looking image. And now all of these changes are not affecting the original layer. If I come over to the layers panel and hide this layer, we can still see the sunset layer is unaffected. Now, if I do want to come in here and run a filter or do some kind of an effect on this layer, there is a way that I can protect this, and that's something called a smart object. If I right click on this and choose Convert to Smart Object, or I can select that from the layer menu, that will actually wrap or encapsulate all of the pixels on that layer into this smart object. So now if I come up to the filter menu, for example, and I come down and run a filter, let's go to the filter gallery. Let's come in here and play with a couple of fun filters. So I can run a few filters in here like film grain or posterized edges, or under brush strokes, I can come in here and turn on sprayed strokes, for example. Come in here and change our properties. All of these filter effects are adjusting or manipulating all of those individual pixels. If I click OK, however, one thing you'll notice is if I run a filter from the filter menu on a smart object layer, I'll get something called a smart filter. So I can now see that this filter gallery item is being applied to this layer. And as you may have guessed, I can come in here and turn off the filter gallery and see the original image. If I want to adjust the original image, I can double click on this layer and go into the smart object. So now I'm actually looking at the contents of the smart object. I'll close this, go back to the original file. Now the great thing here is I can come back here, re-enable the filter gallery, or double click it and come in here and make a change. I can decide to apply a completely different filter. So I can switch this to dry brush, or maybe come down and enable watercolor. I'll bring the brush detail up quite a bit, the textures, and I'll bring the brush detail. I'll just play with this a little bit. Once I like that, I'll come in here and click OK. And now I can see that the filter gallery has been updated to those settings. And now another feature that I get with a smart filter is this layer mask. So this layer mask actually affects the filter itself. So if I select this mask, select my brush tool, get black on the foreground, for example, come in here and start to paint, I can actually paint away that effect. So I can make it so that only the sky is showing me that effect and the water is showing me the original effect. Then I can also come in and re-enable my adjustment layer. I can select my icon here. I'm going to leave the saturation up pretty high. And you may have noticed that the adjustment layers also have a layer mask. So I'll select the layer mask. I'm going to hit Option Delete on the Mac or Control Delete in Windows to fill the entire mask with black. Hit the letter X on the keyboard to paint with white. And then I can come in here and just apply the hue saturation setting only to the sun area. So we can make some pretty dramatic changes to our images without actually changing the original pixels. I can come back here and turn off my adjustment layer, turn off my smart filter, and get back to my original image. And I'll be using these same techniques throughout this workshop to stylize different photographs for our brand. To begin capturing colors from our environment, we're going to start with Adobe Capture. So I'll come up here and tap on Capture. And once inside of Capture, I'm going to scroll through the top here and put this into Looks mode. So I'll tap on Looks. And what Looks allows us to do is basically capture colors, much like we did in the first workshop where we were capturing colors for our mood board. But here we get to capture colors that will be saved in something called a lookup table. And that's something that we can actually load into Photoshop later and actually have those colors mapped to our images. And now we have two options for capturing colors from our environment. We can come down here and tap on the camera or the image. If I tap on the camera, I can point this at anything around me and Capture will dynamically pick out all of the colors. And you'll notice that instead of 5 colors, we get a whole range of colors here. So all of this information is going to be captured. So if I liked any of these colors, I could come down here and hit my shutter and take a picture. However, instead, I'm going to come over here and click on the X. I'm going to exit out of this. And instead, I'm going to load in an image that we modified during the mood board workshop. So I'll come down here and tap on the image icon. From here, I'm going to go into my Creative Cloud. I'll go into my branding workshops. And I'm going to come in here and load this image that we modified earlier on in the series. So this is an image that we started with, which was very cool. And we used Camera Raw inside of Photoshop to warm this up. So I want to use these colors as my basis. So I'll come down here and tap on Open. That's going to load this image into Capture. I'll tap on the check mark, and then I can test these colors against different sample assets. So in here, I can see a group of people. Down at the bottom, I can tap on different applications of this color. So I can swipe through here and see how this color looks based on a couple of different other settings inside of here. I can scroll this up and down to increase or decrease the power that these colors have over the original image. Then if I tap and swipe on the center, I can switch over to a video instead of a photo. And I can do the same thing. I can come down here and tap on different applications of this color against that original video, all while dragging the slider up and down and changing the opacity or the strength of that effect. And then finally, one more time, we can come over here and we can load in our own image or video to test this out. So I like these colors. I'm going to go back to the original image. I'm going to swipe down to the bottom. I'm going to go to the first option here, which is the one that I like. And then I'll come up here and tap Save in the upper right corner. I'll come in here and give this a name. I'll name this Warm Colors. I'll switch my library over to the Altura Athletics library and then tap Save. And now on the main capture screen, I'm in my Altura Athletics library. We can see the Warm Colors LUT showing up there in the upper left corner. So LUT stands for Lookup Table. So the term looks is really short for a lookup table. And so now back on my desktop, I'm going to go into my Creative Cloud application, which I have running here in the background. I'm currently looking at my Altura Athletics library here. And if I scroll down, we'll see this new LUT showing up. So I'm going to come up here and tap on Add Group. I'm going to name this Looks. Then I'll come down here, right click, and I will put this LUT in that new Looks group. And so now that I have this new set of colors that I can apply, next I'll show you how to apply this to a photo in Photoshop. In the previous video, we used Adobe Capture to capture a look or a lookup table based on an image so that we could use that to style other photographs. So inside of Photoshop here, I want to show you how we can make use of that. So here I have this image that we used prominently in the mood board. So what I want to do is I want to apply a lookup table to this. So the first thing that we would do is select the layer in the Layers panel and come down to the Adjustment Layers, click and hold, and we're going to come down and apply Color Lookup. Now what a color lookup table does is it actually has a range of colors associated to it, the actual profile, if you want to think about it like that, and it can apply this profile to the image. And it does it intelligently based on tonal ranges, colors, and so forth. So to see this, I have the color lookup table assigned here. If I open up the properties panel, I can come up here and see my 3D LUT file. If I open up this menu, I can come down here and apply different lookup tables or different LUTs. As I come in here and change different properties, these are some of the presets that come with Photoshop. You can see how dramatically this can change the image. So I'll just select a few more here. Now, after we assign one of these, we can always come over to the layers panel and change the blending mode of this color lookup table adjustment layer. So I can come over here and change this from normal and just hover over the different blending modes and see how the blending modes can interact with the lookup table. So that can be very fun. So what I want to do now is I want to use the lookup table that we created with Adobe Capture. So I'm going to come over here and just hide that lookup table. We're going to go back to the original layer. I'm going to go to the window menu. I'm going to bring up my libraries panel. And in the libraries panel, down here, we created a folder called looks. And if I open this up, here is our warm colors that we captured earlier. Now to apply this, I simply double click on the lookup table in my library. That will automatically assign a new adjustment layer inside of Photoshop, a new color lookup, and it will then assign the lookup file to be the warm colors that we saved to our library. So by simply double clicking this, Photoshop will do all the work to set this up. And now we can see immediately that this image is much warmer and matches more of the image that we adjusted earlier in the workshop series. Now if I come over here, I can do the same thing. I can come in here and change some blend modes. I can look at a couple of options here. Maybe hard light looks pretty cool. And you can use these adjustments to bring a whole range of photographs into the same look and feel. So I'll come up here and leave this on normal. Then I'll come over here to the opacity and I'll just bring this down a little bit. So maybe to about 30% or so, somewhere in this range, maybe a little bit higher. I'm kind of looking at the sun reflection over here. I want that to be a little bit warmer, since when I look at the original image, the sun is coming through the windows here and that's pretty warm. So maybe I'll even come up a little bit higher, maybe around 50 or 60, somewhere between those two ranges, and click away. And that adjustment is going to make this photograph match the tonal range better from the original image from which we created the lookup table. And so now that we have this lookup table, we can apply this to any number of photographs and get a jump start on styling our photography to match our overall brand. In this lesson, we'll take a look at another workflow that will allow us to borrow colors from one image and apply them to another. And we'll do this with curve adjustments. So here's another image that we used on the original mood board. So I'm going to zoom out on this one a little bit. And I want to apply the same sort of tonal range to this image here. So I want to get these on the screen so I can see them both at the same time. So I'll move this around a little bit like this. And now for the image here of these women exercising, I'm going to come over here to the layers panel and I'm going to add a new adjustment layer called curves. So come down here and apply a curves adjustment layer. Now what curves allow us to do is to change the value of the red, green, and blue channels of our content. So if I come in here, for example, and go to the red channel, if I come in here and decrease the lightest area of the red and sort of pull this down, you'll see that the other colors will now sort of flow into that area. So this will get much more blue and green looking. Or if I come in here and increase the red, especially in the lower areas, we'll get a lot more red in the darker areas. So I'm going to come down here and reset that. So curves can be a little bit challenging to figure out what colors you want to change because you actually have to work in the opposite mode. Adding or removing red, for example, allows the other colors to either flow in or be removed. So what I want to do is I want to use the auto curves setting here, but I'm going to hold the Option or Alt key when I click on auto, and that's going to bring up this dialog box here where we can then borrow colors from another image. So I'm going to come down here and choose Find Light and Dark Colors. Then I'm going to come down here, click on Shadows. I'll bring this color bar over here a little bit. And now I get an eyedropper tool. So I can eyedropper areas of this image, or I can eyedropper areas anywhere else on my monitor. So I'm going to come over here and select the darkest shadowed area of this guy's shorts. So I'm going to hover over here. I'm holding the mouse and clicking, and you'll see that the colors are coming into this range here. They're much more brown, this sort of burnt umber color. And so what I like to do is come down here and just increase the black a little bit. And I'm going to increase this by going down about 30 degrees to the lower right. This way I can keep the hue going up a little bit as we get darker. and I'm going to bring this to about right here. As I make changes, you'll see the changes happening in the original image. If I were to drag this around here, for example, you'll see that that will change in this area here. So again, I'll sample a dark area of the shorts, pull this down a little bit, get this to about right here, click OK. Next, I'll come over to the highlights. I'm going to click on the highlights, and I'm going to pick one of the lightest areas here. Now I can come up here and click the sky. Now the sky in this image is blown out, so it's looking pretty much white, and that's okay. But I want to come in here and grab sort of the yellow area in the sun showing up here. So I'm going to hover around here a little bit. And as I'm dragging the eyedropper around, I'm watching this color bar here. So I'm looking to see when the color is not white. So we're getting into this little bit of yellow here. I can come down here and warm that up just a little bit. Move this into place. And as I'm making changes, I can see those changes showing up over here as well. So once I like where that is, I'll come over here and click OK. Then I'll click OK one more time to accept the adjustments. Now when Photoshop asks me if I want this to become my default, I'm going to say no, because that's something I'm going to do on a per image basis. And now if I come over here and look at my curves adjustment, I can see all of the adjustments that were made by sampling colors from this original image here. So if I switch over here to red, I can see the adjustments made to red, adjustments made to green, which are very minor, and the adjustments made to blue. Now, of course, I can come in here and change and move these around, but this is going to give me a jump start on being able to pick up some tonal ranges from another image. Now from here, I can add additional adjustment layers for maybe things like vibrance or levels. You can do any of the other things that we're doing inside of this workshop to further adjust this image to match the overall tonal range of your brand. And now before we move on, make sure you save this as a layered Photoshop file. That way we can reuse this curve adjustments layer in the next video. Now in this lesson, we're going to take a look at how to take this photograph and make it look as though it were shot with a low aperture setting. So the background will be blurry and the foreground will be in focus. And so to do this, I'm going to start by going over to the layers panel. So to start, I'm going to come over here to the layers panel. I'm going to right click on the background layer, choose convert to smart object. Then once this is converted, I'm going to hit Command or Control J to duplicate this to create a second copy. I'm going to select the top copy, come up to the select menu, come down to select subject, and I'm going to let Photoshop try to figure out what the main subject of this photograph is. So here it's selected the woman. Now I want to modify this, so I'm going to come up and click Select and Mask. You can also get to that under the Select menu. Come down and choose Select and Mask. And that's going to bring up this workspace here where I can help Photoshop figure out more of the image that I want to have selected. So it's done a very good job on selecting the woman, but it didn't select the soccer ball at all. So this is where I can inform Photoshop that there's more of this image I'd like to select. So by default, my cursor shows a little plus sign inside of a circle. So as I click and drag inside of here, Photoshop's going to pretty quickly figure out the soccer ball area and make that part of the selection as well. Now over in the properties panel, I have a few different views here. I like this view here, which is the overlay view, which basically shows me everything that I have selected in an unobstructed view here. So I can come in here and make sure that I don't see any red, for example. But there's a couple of other settings you can use. You can use marching ants, and you'll see your selection showing up here. Or you can see your selection against black or white. But again, I like overlay, so I'll just select that. So now I'll come over here, zoom out, take a look at the selection. Now this doesn't have to be too perfect because this is going to be the area that's going to be in focus, and we're actually going to modify this mask a little bit more later as well. So this looks really good. Let's come down and click OK. So now I can see the marching ants selection back in my main workspace. And with my top layer selected, I'll come down here and apply a layer mask. Now to see this, I'll hit the Move tool and just move this around so you can see that the top layer has the background removed. Command or Control D to deselect. So now that I have my subject isolated, let's go back to the layers panel. Let's select the bottom layer. Let's come up to the filter menu. Let's go to Blur Gallery and then choose Iris Blur. So the Iris Blur gives us the ability to pick an area of the photo that's going to be in focus, and then we can control how out of focus the photograph gets based on how far away we are from the center circle. So I'll come in here and center the area. So I'm going to center on these lights here in the background. If I hover over the outer perimeter, I can control how big this blurring area is. And so basically I'm controlling the transitional point. Anything outside of this circumference is going to be fully blurry based on the blur setting that we pick here. I'm going to come in here and make this about this big. Move the center point here a little bit. So her foot and her head and arm are going to be completely outside of that area. So now let's come over here to the blur setting. I'm going to bring this up to a pretty good amount, maybe about 27 or 28. Somewhere in that range here, we can see the blurring happening in the background. To really get a sense of how this is working, you can bring this up really far. This will give you a sense of how the parameters of this actually change the blurring. So I'll bring this back down a little bit. Now there are dots in the center here as well, and the dots control the area of the transition between the focus point and the non-focus point, or the blurry area. So if I take the dots and move them in closer, anything from the center point to these dots is fully in focus. Anything from the dots to the outer perimeter have a gradient effect of the amount of blurriness, going from 0 to whatever the setting is. So in this case, 247. Now to move these independent, you can hold the Option key or Alt in Windows and drag these out. So I'm going to drag out each one of these to about like this. I'll come back to my blur amount. I'm going to bring this back to about 27, where I was at before. And then I'm also going to come down here and apply some light bokeh. So I'm going to bring this up a pretty good amount as well, maybe to around 22 or 23. We've got these spotlights in the background, and you can see how that affects the lights outside of the perimeter of this iris blur. So again, just to see what this does, if I bring this up to a lot, you'll see what happens to the lighting effects here. So I'll bring this down to about 20, 22, 23, somewhere in that range, about right there. So that looks really good. I'm going to come up here and click OK. And now that effect is going to be applied to the bottom layer. Now to get a sense of how much she's not being blurred now since we isolated her, if I come back to the layers panel and turn on and off the top layer, you can see how much of her is now still in focus. However, if I come in here and zoom in, we're getting a little bit of a halo effect because the bottom layer is blurring past the mask that we created on the top layer. So let's come in here and select the top layer. Let's get white on the foreground. Let's select our brush tool. Make sure the brush has a hardness of 0%, so it's nice and soft. Then let's come over here, and what I want to do is decrease my brush size a little bit, and I want to paint in here so that we can see all of her in focus, and I want to basically paint out that halo effect. So I'll come in here and just paint around this area here. We can see the halo around her hands. And using a really soft brush means we're going to get a nice transition from the area that's in focus that we're painting and the background that's being blurred. So this basically gives me a way to go around the outside and paint out that halo effect. And if you do it too far, you can always hit the X key, and that will put black on the foreground, and you can paint back in some of the blurred areas. I'll come up here to my navigator. I'm going to navigate down to her foot. Her foot area was also in the most blurred area, which means we're going to have some haloing effect down here. Hit the X key to get white on the foreground, and I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to just sort of paint around just the edge of her cleats, give her some of that extra haloing effect, and just follow that around here. Then I'll zoom out here a little bit. Next, I'll come over here and see if I have any haloing around the soccer ball, which I do, and I'll do the same thing. I'll just come in here and just paint around the edge and get rid of that halo effect there as well. So now that I have my effect in place, now I want to apply that color adjustment that we did in the last video. So I have this open inside of Photoshop. So here's the image where we used our curves adjustment, where we borrowed colors from another image. And what I can do here is I can grab the curves adjustment layer and drag it right into my new image here. Now when that gets applied, it's going to come in here as the topmost layer since I had the top layer selected. And now that I'm looking at this effect, some of the color adjustments that I have for that curve aren't working quite as well in this darker nighttime image. So what I'm going to do is come down to the properties panel. I'm going to come down and hit reset, which will keep my curves adjustment but take all of the settings away. And for this image, I'm going to come in here and do some of this manually. So I'll come into the red, green, and blue menu, come down to blue. For blue, I'm going to come down here to the darkest areas on the lower left corner. I'm going to click here and just drag this down a little bit. That's going to allow some of the red and green to flow into this darker area. Now you don't want to do too much. Curves are really powerful. Next, let's come up here to the red And in the upper right corner in the lightest area, I'm going to come up here and just push a little bit more of the red in here. So I'll just bring this up just a little bit. And then to see the effects of the curves, I'll just come over here and turn these on and off for a second so we can see a before and after. And so now we have a much warmer nighttime shot with a blurry background that really helps us focus on the soccer player. In this lesson, we're going to take a look at the Camera Raw plugin inside of Photoshop, but I think it's worthwhile to take a look at what Camera Raw even is. So when you take a photograph with your camera, if your camera supports the RAW format, instead of taking a typical JPEG or PNG image, what the camera is actually doing is storing all of the light data. So to show what the difference is, I'm going to go over to Photoshop here, come up to the File menu and choose Open. And on the desktop here, I have the same image in two different formats. So I have a chocolates.jpg file. If I select this, this is actually the raw image that I just simply saved from Photoshop without any adjustments. And you can see here in the preview all of the information about this JPEG file, which is not a lot. It can tell me the file size, the color space, the dimensions. But if I come over here and select the raw file, this is the actual file from the camera that I used. And we can see all of that information. We can see the type of camera, the file size, and this is all of the information about the aperture settings, the ISO, everything that I set on the camera to take that photograph. So all of this information is in here. And what this means is if I come in here and choose Open and open the Camera Raw file in Photoshop, this is going to invoke the Camera Raw plugin. Now the Camera Raw plugin hooks into Adobe Bridge, Photoshop, Lightroom, and After Effects. And so what happens is before this gets into Photoshop, we get to come in here and change the properties of that Camera Raw file. Now we're not actually changing the Camera Raw file itself, but we are changing the properties on how that information is going to be translated to Photoshop. So we can come in here and do things like adjust the temperature, adjust the tint. There are just endless amounts of things that you can do in here. It's incredibly powerful. So if I were to come in here and just make a couple of really quick adjustments here, so maybe make this look about like that. Come down here and click Open. This will open in Photoshop and it will look like the adjustments that we made. However, you'll also notice on my desktop now I have a new XMP file. This is a data file that goes along with the Camera Raw image so that any application from Adobe that's going to open this image will look to see if this file exists. So it knows how to open this file and how to apply those changes. Again, the raw file is not being adjusted, but this file tells the other applications how to adjust this. And so to demonstrate this working in another application, I'll switch over to After Effects. And inside of After Effects, I'm going to take the Camera Raw image and just drag it right into my project panel. After Effects comes up and all of these settings are already set because it found this XMP file. I'll hit Cancel. I'll take this XMP file and delete it. Then drag the Camera Raw image into After Effects. After Effects will bring up the Camera Raw plugin again. However, all of the settings that we set before are no longer here. After Effects couldn't find that XMP file. And so now back in Photoshop, I want to show you that we can actually use the Camera Raw plugin on any image. It doesn't have to be a raw image. So I'll come in here to Photoshop and open up that chocolates.jpg file. So this file does not have any of that extra raw data in there. However, Photoshop will let us run the Camera Raw plugin and it will do its best to give us the same kind of adjustments that we would get with a Camera Raw image. So first I'll come over here to the Layers panel. Let's come in here and convert this to a Smart Object. And then once it's a Smart Object, we'll go up to the Filter menu and come down and choose Camera Raw Filter. So inside of here, we can come in and start to make some of the same adjustments. And now notice that all of these properties are zeroed out. There is no actual Camera Raw data for Camera Raw to lock onto, but we can still come in here and start to make adjustments as if it were a Camera Raw image. So I could come in here and start to make some of the same adjustments that we made earlier. Change the exposure, vibrance, saturation. There are so many amazing things that you can come in here and do in the Camera Raw filter. So I might come in here and make a couple of changes like this, click OK. And since I applied this filter to a Smart Object, this turns into a Smart Filter, meaning I can come back, double click on Camera Raw, and come in here and continue to make additional changes. So this is a completely non-destructive workflow, and it gives me some of the more advanced adjustment controls that I'm used to when working with Camera Raw images. Now, if you've browsed the Discover channel inside of Creative Cloud at all, you may have found that there are a lot of free assets that you can download for different applications. Now in my other tabs, I've opened up a couple of different Lightroom presets that I've seen recently, and these are presets that you can download and then load into Lightroom and automatically apply those changes to your images. So here is a Lightroom preset for pets, another one for portraits, another one for indoor portraits, and then this set of presets I was particularly interested in because it relates to food. So if I scroll down here, I can see a couple of different examples, some before and afters on what some of these presets will do. Down at the bottom, there's some instructions for both Lightroom and Lightroom Classic. And then you can also come in here and download the assets. Now, once I download these, they're going to come into my operating system after I extract them as a series of XMP files. We saw this in the last video as well. Once we made some adjustments in Camera Raw, we got an XMP file. So these are a series of instructions that I can load into Lightroom and control some of those Camera Raw settings. So I'm going to close this. Let's go back over to Lightroom. I'm going to select that image on the desktop, choose Develop, and inside of the Develop workflow on the left-hand side, I'll come over to my presets, click on the plus sign, and choose Import Presets. Then from the desktop, I'll go into that group. I'm going to hold the Shift key, select all of these, and then choose Import. And now all of these are going to be imported into a group, if I scroll down here, called Adobe Presets. If I toggle this open, I can see all of those individual presets. And if I hover over these, I can see a quick preview of what these are going to look like. So as I go through here, the one that I think looks pretty good is this dark roast. So I'm going to select this as a starting point. And once I've applied this preset, I can come over here to the right and make some further adjustments. So I can come in here, for example, and maybe warm this up just a little bit. Play with the tint. And again, I can come in here and change any of these individual properties. These presets give me sort of a jump start. Since dark roast is probably related to coffee, which relates to coffee beans, which are probably a similar color as the paper around these chocolates, that gave me a jump start on correcting this particular image. And then I can come down here and make further adjustments as I see fit. Maybe I'll bump the vibrance up a little bit because these are very colorful, and maybe a little bit on the saturation. So presets give us a quick way to jump to a series of settings inside of Camera Raw, and then we can fine-tune those settings based on our individual images. Well, this brings us to the end of this workshop. We've taken a look at quite a few different techniques for altering the style and mood of different photographs. And as you can imagine, there are a whole world of possibilities for styling your photos in Creative Cloud. So I would encourage you to take a look at the Discover channel in the Creative Cloud app, or even search the Photoshop home screen for even more tutorials. And with that, I hope you'll join me in the next workshop where we'll visualize our brand in real-world situations using templates and even creating our own mock-ups using Substance Stager.